does. And this is a very interesting show I have for you, something a little bit different I haven't really discussed a lot, and that is CERN. I've got Anthony Patch and Doug Woodward, and I'm hosting their conversation. And I just cannot tell you how mind-blowing and interesting what these two gentlemen discuss really is. I hope that you'll listen to it. In fact, once you start listening and they start getting really into the meat of the subject matter, you're going to be just as stunned as I was as I listened when they were talking. So be sure and check it out. And Doug, you're going to start off tonight and start the whole conversation. So let's get this started. And wow, like I said, I just can't wait for my listeners to hear this. I'm going to be getting this together real quick and uploading it.
Lynn, thank you so much for this opportunity. Anthony and I really appreciate the chance to kind of talk in depth about our new book, Revising Reality, A Biblical Look into the Cosmos. Anthony Patch is a friend, and he and I have been really getting to know each other very well over the past 6-8 months. And we're really excited about the opportunity tonight to talk about our book and kind of go in depth. And folks, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a PowerPoint that we've prepared, and so you'll have a really nice visual set of images to look at as we're talking. So we're going to let the PowerPoint kind of guide us, and then we'll add some material that probably isn't in the book, but in general, most of the material that we'll talk about is probably still at the high level, meaning that there's a lot more in depth in the book. And again, we're going to be talking about the chapters that Anthony wrote and supplied the material. I did some editing on it, but we're really focused on the 2 chapters that he did. The book itself has about 12 chapters. So this is just a portion of it, but it's one of the most interesting portions, I think, of the book. And so Anthony, I'm so glad you've joined me here and the opportunity to share this with Lynn's audience, and tell the folks a little bit, if you would, just about your personal background, because some folks on her channel may not be familiar with who you are and kind of how you got started in CERN and all that kind of stuff.
Well, thanks, Douglas. It's always a pleasure when we get together with Lynn, and it is a detailed book, but it is a book that is easily read by anyone, but it's credit to you for bringing it to a university level of composition and the layout and the final editing. I credit you with that. But my background,
I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I retired as a paramedic after 27 years in Oakland. And prior to that, I first ran into the world of nuclear armament when I was in the Army in West Germany. And that's where I first heard about CERN, when I was involved with nuclear warheads. And following the Army, I developed quite a bit of a hobby in physics, and that led about 6 years ago to the Lord bringing me to an understanding of the occult, the hidden side to CERN, the nefarious, if you will. And that's what has launched me into writing now 3 books, along with you, concerning CERN, and also quite a bit of public speaking and interviews such as this. So really, I got into it as a hobby, but the Lord has led me directly into really the spiritual side of what is going on at CERN. Tonight, we're going to talk more of the nuts and bolts kind of thing and going through this presentation, some of the hard science of it, but we're also going to connect to the spiritual side when we get into talking about Saturn and its connection to the Large Hadron Collider.
Yeah, absolutely. The title of the PowerPoint that we're going to work through together is, of course, Revising Reality, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about what we mean by why we picked out that name. But the subtitle, From Gluons to Galaxies, from the rings of CERN to the rings of Saturn. So, Anthony, what did you think about me selecting that title?
No, I think it's truly inspired, and it illustrates your background in marketing and advertising. So, tip of the hat to you, my friend.
Yeah, and what's, of course, important is that it really is right on point. in terms of talking about the strong force and the gluons, to what connects the galaxies, all the stars in the galaxies. And, we'll probably talk about that pretty much up front. And then the rings of CERN, and really crescendoing with the rings of Saturn, and how all these things are actually connected, because it is, as we've discovered in other audiences that we've talked with, it's pretty mind-blowing stuff. And it really wasn't until I started working with you that I knew as much about the Saturn cult as I've learned. And of course, I'm still learning. It is a very, very deep, occult, dark, religious, sort of body of knowledge. And so we'll get into that in the latter stages of our presentation. So we'll talk first. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of the cosmology end of this. And it was, sort of, I guess, my idea to frame a book that deals with a lot of the research that you had been doing, and Dr. Michael Heiser and L.A. Marzulli and Steve Quayle and others, around the issue of everything from the Nephilim to CERN to transhumanism. And I guess it was sort of my inspiration to say, hey, why don't we do a cosmology book from a biblical perspective that takes all this research that we've done and tries to pull it together into sort of a single book that provides a biblical worldview, but it's up to date, meaning that it looks at what research has been done sort of over the last 10 years that's been very influential in eschatology, and to talk about that. And so I don't know if originally when I threw the idea out of cosmology, if that made sense to you or not, Anthony. Did that seem to make sense to approach it that way?
It really does, and I want to emphasize that my most recent research has shown that the relevance of the cosmos is actually greater than the nuts and bolts physics that's going on at CERN. CERN is a very small component to the overall larger picture and larger agenda that's going on, specifically to our entire solar system, all of our planets. And that's something that you and I will bring out in volume 2. But
yes.
This volume one by itself is a departure. It is a seminal work. It stands by itself in the genre of the area that we operate in and that we move through in the area of Christian prophecy. This is a unique body of work in the world of Christian prophecy.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way, and of course we're probably self-congratulating one another, but we do feel earnestly about that, and that's really why we put sort of our backs to the plow and put together a book that we thought would have a long shelf life and would provide context for folks. And the name Revising Reality, there are a lot of aspects to that name that we're not going to explore until we get to Volume 2. But in Volume 1, in terms of the thinking behind the name, and we all went back and forth with ourselves, with Josh and with Gons, looking at those names. And it was really the idea that so much of what popularly is taught in our schools, and whether it's at the high school level or even at the at the advanced PhD level, has a certain series of ideas regarding the nature of the cosmos, really based upon the Einsteinian model. And we're going to talk a bit about Einstein versus Tesla, but a lot of it is it's a picture of reality, a picture of the cosmos based upon a number of scientific theories about the cosmos that we think are wrong. And there's a number of physicists that are saying they're wrong as well. And so we're gonna talk about that. I guess the one of the first slides in the slide deck is atheism. In the beginning there was nothing, and then it exploded, which of course is a little bit of a paradox.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, but that is of course one of the first scientific premises of the cosmos, is that it all comes from a very tiny, highly compressed ball, and then it exploded at some point in time, about 13.8 billion years ago, and various things have been causing that to to shape the way that it is shaped to create life on this particular planet, and so that's kind of really where the sort of the scientific mysticism sort of begins. I mean, so much of the science is purely speculation, and it's theory, and it's not testable in a laboratory, and so by definition it can't be scientific because it's not a repeatable hypothesis that can be disproven. And by the definition of science, that means it's not really science. It's a religion. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and just as a touch point for the audience, we're talking about dark matter and dark energy, which is so often cited by science in general, but especially at CERN, that is what they are seeking, is to discover by detecting and measuring and reproducing dark matter and dark energy. Well, all they need to do is take a look at the work of Tesla and see that the universe is filled not with dark matter and dark energy, but with electricity and ionized gas in the form of plasma, the fourth state of matter. And this has been borne out in detecting, measuring, and reproducing in the laboratory to the nth degree to prove that this is true, that the electric model of the universe is truly valid. And we'll get into that more later on in the presentation.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're going to actually put forth, even though this is from a biblical worldview, we're going to put forth some information about the view of the cosmos that actually is based on science and is reproducible in the laboratory. And so just kind of say that to whet your appetite. So moving on, when we throw out these words cosmology and cosmos, I kind of get people looking at me cross-eyed because they're actually not familiar with those terms. But in our day, cosmology, really since the time of Carl Sagan, has been a word that's been become more familiar, at least in the academic circles. And it's based upon a Greek word, cosmos. Usually you see it spelled with a K. And it means an order or the world order. It sort of implies that there is a well-ordered or design. In theology, the word is used called teleology for a design. And so the idea is that the universe isn't just happenstance. It actually has a structure and a design to it. And of course, if there's a design, it suggests that there's some intelligence behind it. And of course, that's one of the core premises that the Judeo-Christian worldview has that science doesn't share with us, and yet the scientists are comfortable using the term cosmology and cosmologist, even though it has a sort of a semantic connotation that there is order and design in the universe. I always find that kind of curious.
Yeah, there's the theory, the chaos theory, and then there's the order theory. And I prefer the order theory, as I believe that from a Christian perspective, there is a plan, there is a design, there is an intelligent design. And by virtue of that design, you have order.
Exactly. In fact, in the second volume, we'll talk a bit more about creation and the theories of the Greeks is that the world was chaos, and from the chaos, order came about. And whereas the Bible is interesting because the Bible suggests that the world was, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then in verse 2 it says, basically it says, but the earth had become formless and void, and it can be even translated had become a wasteland. And so this gets into the gap theory about the from the time that God created the creation, and it wasn't created in chaos, and yet it had become chaotic. Something occurred, and again, this gets into what is known as the gap theory, and it's something that we will talk about more in Volume 2. But we're going to talk more about cosmology as it relates really to end times, to eschatology, rather than at the creation. And one of the little jokes that we sort of have commonly is when you say cosmology to somebody, they think you're talking about beautifying the face, the hair, the hands, and that you're talking about cosmetology. And no, we're not talking about cosmetology. We're talking about the cosmos. And so, someone with an advanced degree from beauty school is an esthetician. They're not a cosmologist. So, although a lot of people might think that. So I have a slide also that explains that a cosmologist is someone with an advanced degree typically from a Harvard or an Oxford. Brian Greene, of course, Lisa Randall has written extensively. A guy we're going to introduce to the audience tonight, Wallace Thornhill with the Electric Universe Project, is a genuine cosmologist. But the cosmologist par excellence that everyone recognizes is Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan wrote a book in 1980 called Cosmos, which makes sense. And this book was really done in concert with a TV program that was presented on public TV, and it is today worldwide, globally, still the most popular television program that has ever been done. So it really caught the spirit of kind of the interest and the fascination with what is out there in space, outer space, and whether there really is meaning to all of it. And of course, Sagan, although he was, he really was an atheist. He was a nice guy, but he was involved as an astronomer. He was involved in almost all of the key NASA space shots, really from early on going to the moon to the Mariners and the Voyagers that went to Mars and so forth. So he played a very, very instrumental role in NASA. And as most people may or may not be aware, he actually was sort of a mentor to today's most popular astronomer, cosmologist, Neil deGrasse Tyson. And Tyson speaks glowingly of an afternoon he was able to spend with Sagan in, near Columbia. I don't know if it was Columbia or in Albany. I'm not sure where it was, but in New York. But really, Sagan inspired Neil deGrasse Tyson to become an astronomer. And of course, he's very popular and popularizes a lot of outer space discussion, and then redid the Cosmos program about a year ago for public television as well. So anyway, Sagan is kind of a giant figure in this whole discussion.
Well, as a segue into your next discussion about why are we talking about this stuff, Neil is still an adherent to what I consider, what you and I've put forth as a simple way of looking at the two schools of thought. He's still an adherent to the Einstein gravity model of the universe. And so it speaks to the level of sophistication of the propaganda that we are running counter to in the production of this book.
No, that's right, and we're looking at slide 8 now. The most famous cosmologist today, just about everyone's familiar with Stephen Hawking. He has some interesting perspectives on CERN that we'll talk about later. Michio Kaku is also quite famous. Has done a lot of programs on Discovery Channel, History Channel, and then, as I said, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He can go pack out a fairly large auditorium in just a lecture on the subject of astronomy, and very popular guy, funny guy, has just a great sense of humor, very pleasant, very affable, and so both Michio Kaku and Neil deGrasse Tyson both have done a masterful job of propagandizing the Einsteinian view for Gen X and millennials, and it really is. We have been thoroughly brainwashed into the point of view that Einstein was right, that the fundamental force in the universe is gravity, and a bunch of other things that we'll get into as we look at the science. Hawking, of course, has really been seen as probably the most brilliant cosmologist, astronomer, astrophysicist, and so forth. And I have had a couple of people in my family that have had Lou Gehrig's disease, and of course that's ALS is why he has been in a wheelchair since he was in his 20s, I believe. So
Right.
he's quite an amazing guy. But and as I said, he'll actually have some interesting things that we'll talk about related to CERN and some of the dangers of it that the other guys may not have said. So anyway, so talking about why is this that we're spending time on this stuff? Why are we talking about it? And we got on slide number 9. The first issue in terms of revising reality is really revising our thinking. Christians have been brainwashed for 50 years to believe, and I'm just going to run through these pretty quickly. The cosmos is infinite with no limits, and it's expanding forever to entropy, to where it basically breaks down into complete cold isolation. Everything's far apart. The idea that the universe began with the Big Bang and not with God's word spoken. That gravity is the power that holds the cosmos together. Again, these are things we're saying are falsehoods. That 96% of the universe cannot be seen or measured, that it's conjectured. It can't be measured with any of our best scientific instruments. Huge things are being done, to try to detect neutrinos and different very, very tiny quanta or small particles. But according to they've never really discovered it. So the Higgs boson, I might have you talk about here after I finish this list and talk about whether it's really been discovered or not, and kind of the role that CERN played. So get ready for that. Outer space is a vacuum. That's the common view. It's filled with nothing. That the solar system has always been the way it is now. That it's in effect heliocentric around the current sun that we have. That humanity is a product of evolution, and that there is no purpose for us really. And so kind of the core idea behind our book was it's time for us to revise our reality and return to the Bible. And so, but Anthony, comment some, if you would, on some of these points and some of the things in particular. You might almost sort of go through the list and talk about what it is that we're asserting and how it compares with these, and then we'll kind of get into talk a bit more about the personalities of Einstein and Tesla maybe after that.
Yeah, well, the cosmos, as far as it being infinite with no limits, the limit that I would put to that from my Christian perspective is that God is on the outside of our cosmos, of our universe, and that he exists outside that realm, that there is a limit to our universe. It's only because our human brains are so limited in themselves that we put the label of infinite to it, because we're not able to measure the outer limits of the universe or the cosmos. I was going to just throw in a real quick thought. I think it's something like scientists know that the number of actual particles in the universe is something like 10 to the 47th power, and that the Planck constant is like 10 to the negative 17th power. And what that says, and this is Chuck Missler, all right, I'm getting this from, is that the universe is finite on both ends. You can only go so small, and you can only go so far. And it's not infinite in either direction. It is limited. It is finite. Please go ahead. Yeah, and even those numbers are subject to conjecture because, again, we do not have the instruments to actually measure those two extremes. Even with a particle accelerator such as the Large Hadron Collider that is colliding particles and discovering smaller and smaller and newer subatomic particles, quantum particles, we still have not found that finite limit at the lower scale, at the Planck limit. So those are arbitrary numbers. They're baseless. It just sounds good. It sounds like they know what they're talking about. And this is indicative of the pattern of behavior in science, in particular in particle physics and cosmology on a grander scale, that numbers will be bantied around, such as saying that the dark matter and dark energy, that you can assign a percentage to it and say that the remainder, which is visible and and detectable and measurable to us is 4% of the known universe. Well, again, you cannot put a number to something you can't detect and measure. So this is the pattern of lies and propaganda that's put out by mainstream science. Now, by way of background for me, what I do is I read their papers. I read the hard science and I read between the lines, and I see where mathematically they are using conjecture in their equations that in theory are proving their theories, when in fact their theories are not provable. And to back me up is the work of the Thunderbolts project that we're going to get into, specifically to the electric universe, in which many of the up-and-coming scientists are backing up what I'm just saying in a very succinct way. So moving on, if we talk about the Big Bang, yes, we have an expanding universe, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it began with a singular compression of matter and energy that suddenly was released. We'll talk a little bit later on about my theory of the expanding universe, in that it is not an explosion, but rather a replication process that's going on.
Talk about the concept of the vacuum. Is it really filled with nothing? I mean, that's a very Einsteinian, issue. The ether, whether there is an ether or not. Talk to that, if you would.
Well, Tesla was very definitive in his work in proving that we are surrounded by ether, specifically plasma, the fourth state of matter. And this has been proven out. And I would direct people to some work that's associated with the Thunderbolts project, and that is the Sapphire project. And the Sapphire project is modeling the processes taking place within the sun. And they have proven in the laboratory definitively that the vacuum of outer space is filled with ionized gas, which is a conductive medium. They have proven that the model of the sun is based on plasma and the attraction of energy from the cosmos, from the ionized supposed vacuum of space, from the vacuum that surrounds all the planets, all the suns, all the stars. The sun is actually drawing energy in, and that is the process that they've proven in the laboratory. Tesla spoke of the ether as the zero-point energy. He proved through his experimentation that you had a limitless supply of electrical energy that you could both tap into as a source, but also use as a medium for the transmission of energy and signals.
This was what he was working on in Colorado Springs as early as like 1898, I think, in that time frame, because he was convinced that wireless, not only wireless radio, but wireless energy could be transmitted. And so, if folks have seen the movie, let's see, what was it called, the Prestige? You see Tesla is never identified, but he's a pivotal figure in that movie, and you see them. They hint at some of the things that he was doing with the big coil and the little wireless light bulbs that are all across the ground, and all of a sudden they started glowing, and that was Tesla's work, and so he was proposing a radically different view, and of course didn't make his benefactor J.P. Morgan and John Rockefeller too happy, because they really wanted the world to be reliant upon fossil fuels and ways to make money.
They wanted to commoditize the world for economic gain, whereas Tesla had a more benevolent motivation in which he wanted to free mankind from the dependence of electricity that is man-made and allow tapping into the natural medium of electricity as an unlimited source of energy that would then free up mankind from wars. Even though he had developed many kinetic energy and directed energy weapons himself, he was against the concept of war entirely.
Right.
So
and
what we
absolutely.
have going on is we have a cover-up. Just to kind of put a Band-Aid on this thing, we have a cover-up that's going on, because mainstream physics in particular has pushed the whole idea of gravity, the gravity model, which is really where you've commoditized the production of electricity and energy in general. And therefore, it's to their financial benefit to stick to the gravity model and not mention Tesla and his work. But as you and I have shown, the latest work that's going on at CERN does involve Tesla technology, in specifically the Awake Linear Accelerator, which is a plasma wake field accelerator. That is a Tesla machine, Tesla device. So it's beginning to come out that they all along have been involved in Tesla physics, but they've tried to hide that. They've tried to occult that by talking about dark matter and dark energy, which is all part of the gravity model.
Exactly. So I'm going to move on. There's other points here. We're going to talk about the solar system a little bit later, the idea of the perfect sun, and so forth. But anyway, that's let's jump away from some of the heavy science and talk about some of the perhaps the more far-reaching kinds of assertions that we make in the book. So I'm looking at slide number 10 for folks if you're following along with us visually, and we hit upon a number of issues, and what I might do here is just list these, and then have Anthony have you talk for maybe just 10 or 15 seconds on each one of these at a very general level. Then we're going to drill down into these in more detail. So sure. First off, the first one is dangers of CERN's Large Hadron Collider. You might mention, what is a hadron? Where does the term CERN come from? And what is perhaps the most notable danger of CERN?
Yeah, the name CERN really is just a French acronym for nuclear research. And the hadron is a family of quantum particles. And therefore, they are looking at all of these different types of quantum particles within the hadron and some other hadronic families. Mm-hmm. So therefore, they come up with the HLC, the hadron.
Actually, I got the acronym.
I got it backwards.
Yeah, it should be LHC, Large Hadron Collider. Yeah, thank you. So
the reason they call it large is simply because it is the largest collider in the world. But there are some total of around 100 synchrotron, that's a ring-based collider around the planet, but all of them are smaller. And actually, the CERN facility is made up of 4 colliders, or I should say accelerators. 4 accelerators, and then the main ring being the final accelerator and collider device. The opening of dimensional portals relates to the dangers of CERN. And when we talk about Stephen Hawking, he has said that he feels that there is absolute existential to the human race, existential danger to this communicating with aliens and this concept of opening a doorway, as Sergio Berciolini, one of the directors at CERN, openly stated that their primary agenda item is to open an interdimensional gateway. And Hawking's problem with that is that he does not believe that those on the other side are benevolent in nature.
Yeah, or there's no guarantee, at least, that they're benevolent. And given what Columbus did to the Native Americans, and then some of the movies that we see, usually the aliens are coming to conquer us. And so, Independence Day or whatever. So, and Hawking is basically saying, there's good reason to think that might be the case. So, I think that's interesting.
As we'll get in a little later, when you have here Earth calling Saturn, real quickly, one of the other aspects to this opening of a portal is the connecting electrically of the Earth to the southern pole of Saturn, and we'll define that more, but they literally want to create a Birkeland current plasma conduit to Saturn. So as we move on through the list of CERN and the Tower of Babel, this is the modern-day version of the Tower of Babel, in which Nimrod was trying to reach heaven. And his goal in reaching heaven was to kill God. And that is still the goal of what will be the resurrected Nimrod and the stated goal of Satan himself. We talked a little bit about the standard model already, Einstein versus Tesla. So we'll go to the black cube and the occult. The black cube is within the gaseous body of CERN. The black cube is related to the worship of the black sun being Saturn itself. Many people will relate that to the Nazis, but the occult worship of the black sun is rife through humanity. And this is what is driving, from that nefarious side, what is driving CERN. The worship of the black sun is the reconnecting to Saturn to free the 7 titans, the fallen angels, trapped within this prison of a black cube. And this comes right out of the intelligence communities. This isn't just our conjecture, but it also comes out of the secret societies.
It's hard for people to believe that the intelligence communities could actually necessarily adopt or accept something as apparently outrageous as that. But there's some evidence that is in fact the case. And so, so go ahead and let's finish up the list here.
Yeah, do angels have DNA, and why did the Nephilim matter to us? Well, this is the time of Noah, reproduced in modern time. And during the time of Noah, genetic modification was taking place on a grand scale with chimera, but also the mating of fallen angels with human females, resulting in the giants. And this is something that L.A. Marzulli does a great job of explaining. The destiny of humanity, man-machine hybrids. You've heard of transhumanism, but really what we're talking about here is not just the uploading of our consciousness into a computer, but moving beyond that to, again, DNA, to the actual creation of DNA from scratch using a DNA sequencer and the base chemicals. And these relate back, the DNA research and the manipulation, right back to particle accelerators, and we'll explain that as well.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
And just moving quickly, just the cosmic wars, the ancient myths and Saturn. This is where Volume 2 is going to go into in more depth. But what people have attributed or assigned as myths, when we look at the Mesopotamian and the Sumerian writings and the hieroglyphs of Egypt, it's too easy to just assign these as myth. What we have found, and what I have found in my most recent research, most of these myths are based upon scientific fact, but they're also mixed with spiritual fact, because you cannot separate the spiritual from the physical.
Absolutely. And let's see, the Divine Council. This is work that we've sort of summarized and brought into the context of the rest of the book that's been done, wonderfully done by Dr. Michael Heiser. And so we talk about that, talk about the relationship to these other dimensional entities. And so there's actually that as a thread that runs throughout the book. And again, Josh Peck was very involved, as was Gans Shimura, in this. In fact, just to move on to the next slide, just to kind of remind everybody, Anthony and I have talked a bit about ourselves, but Josh is the author of a number of books on physics and multiple dimensions, and is the host of Into the Multiverse and Skywatch TV, working with Tom Horn and Derek Gilbert and Sharon Gilbert and so on. Gonzo Shimura is an award-winning filmmaker and did the film, I guess, Transhumanism or Transhuman. I'm not sure what the title was, but is the host of Face Like the Sun, has a very large following on YouTube, and he did a lot of great work researching and talking about this issue of transhumanism, the man-machine interface. And we were very blessed to have Stan Deyo, who has had an incredible career. Stan wrote a wonderful foreword for us that talks about gravitics, earthquakes, UFOs, and a lot of Stan's work was actually part of what has come to be called the secret space program. And he worked for a number of years in Australia in a deep underground military base, a U.S. base actually in the heart of Australia. And Stan talks about that in one of his landmark books, Cosmic Conspiracy. But he gets us off to to a great start, talking about his experience. And in a nutshell, Stan's work on anti-gravity and so forth was based to a great extent on the work of Tesla. And again, because Tesla was actually making discoveries about how we can tap into the energy that surrounds us and even potentially defeat gravity in terms of instead of using aerodynamic or aerodynes, that we might in fact be able to use other types of sky ships, if you will. And I've had the blessing of having Stan explain some of that to me and some of the work that's been done. So long story short there, UFOs do exist. Many of them are produced by human beings. Okay, let's leave it at that. All right. The keys to Christian cosmology. This is kind of the core, where the starting point, and what I do at the very beginning of the book is talk about that the relationship between Yahweh and Yeshua and human beings is really where Christian and Judeo-Christian cosmology begin. You know, the first chapter of Genesis talks about in the beginning that God created the heavens and the earth, but within the first 27 verses, it quickly gets to the story of creating humanity as the crown of creation. And one of the major points that I make in the first portion of the book is that science, Carl Sagan, for instance, would look at the cosmos and he would say, well, the meaning of the cosmos is that we can participate in it and that we can be awed by the grandeur of it. And for him, that is the meaning, that is as far as the meaning of humanity goes, is that we should just see ourselves as part of it. Whereas the Judeo-Christian view, of course, is radically different. It says that that human beings were created to be the custodians of the cosmos, and that far from what Carl Sagan said, that we're living on a little planet circling around an average yellow sun on the wing of an average-sized galaxy, circling, the core or center of the universe, in which there are 100 billion galaxies. So his point was, we would appear to be very insignificant. And if we weren't created by God and weren't created to be at the center of the cosmos, then his comment would say that, we would be right to be pessimistic, that there's not a whole lot of reason to justify our being significant. So any comment there, Anthony?
Yeah, it kind of deflates us, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a little depressing. So that's why, you get to the next slide, cosmology centered on this earth, Genesis 1:27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. All right, so repetition in Hebrew like this, where 3 times in the same verse it says God created, he created. And who did he create? He created humankind. And so the emphasis is very, very clear that God created humankind. We are sons of God, and we are meant to be special. Now, in the context of what may have happened between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, the so-called gap theory that says that there may have been a rebellion, and this may have been the satanic rebellion that occurred and took what was a world of order and turned it into chaos, and God had to restructure the chaos and bring it back into order again. And that's really what I believe, and that is the statement that I think is being made in the early verses of Genesis. But again, this is an area for debate amongst good, solid Christians, and the book does not assume the gap theory. The book just assumes that God created humanity. So anyway, go ahead.
It speaks to the material perspective. If you want to speak a little philosophically here, science in general looks at the material and try to prove our existence through the material. Specifically in particle physics, the search for smaller and smaller and newer, yet undiscovered particles, because they feel that if you break down matter enough, you will find the beginning. You'll find the origin to how we were made and how the universe was made. That's a very material perspective, whereas we look at it from the creation standpoint of this was very much a supernatural event.
Right, absolutely. So it's time, Anthony, for you to talk about strangelets and gluons. And so let's look at the next slide. We actually do show the name for the European Organization for Nuclear Research, Organisation Européenne pour la Recherche Nucléaire, which is the best I can do. That recherche, I'm sure I got that wrong. The French are probably hemorrhaging, those that are listening, so apologies. But let's talk about strangelets, why they're important, the quark gluon condensate, and talk about the meaning and the real relevance of the power that's produced by these collisions.
Yeah, the strangelet is something that is not readily discussed by CERN. Lots of their papers are published. The relativistic heavy ion collider at Brookhaven Laboratory in New York was the first to really produce them, and they produced them at 10 tera electron volts. That's a measure of the mass. It's also a measure of the electrical potential, but the point of strangelets is that they are being created at CERN. They will call it a quark gluon condensate because they feel that the word strangelet will panic the average person into thinking that there's something amiss, something afoot.
Well, there were actually lawsuits brought against CERN by other scientists back in, I think, in the 80s because of the fear that strangelets would be created and that they could turn the Earth into a neutron star. Is that not correct?
That is correct. That's absolutely valid. And so what we're looking at here when we talk about strangelets, there are three main characteristics. The first is that strangelets are the most powerful explosive substance in the known universe. The other is that, similar to the action of the theoretical black hole, and I stress theoretical because black holes have never been, again, detected, measured, and reproduced in the laboratory, even though it's spoken of all the time. But in that theory of the gravitational attraction of matter to the center of a black hole, strangelets, by way of their inherent nature of being stable, will attract all other matter to themselves. All other matter meaning unstable matter, which the strangelets have that unique characteristic of being stable. So they do attract matter to themselves, and that is the process by which a neutron star is formed. Now, the third characteristic is that they cannot be trapped, they cannot be stored, they cannot be bound. And therefore, what happens is that they move from the point of generation, specifically within the ALICE detector at the Large Hadron Collider and also at Brookhaven when they were producing them, they plummet to the core of the planet, where they reach a state of equilibrium in terms of the electromagnetic lines of force, the balance at the core of electromagnetism. They come to rest at the core, and that's where they begin to attract ordinary matter to themselves, collapsing the planet into a neutron star. Now, it requires a large quantity of strangelets, and to date there has not been sufficient amount of strangelets produced to begin that process of converting the planet. However, we are seeing effects that are taking place with the increase in tectonic activity, earthquakes and volcanic activity. And when you see earthquakes at great depths like 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers, that is indicative of strangelets pulling matter or attracting matter to themselves towards the core. Again, these are produced anytime the machine, the Large Hadron Collider, or another synchrotron like Brookhaven, achieves collision energies of 10 tera electron volts. The LHC this year and the latter part of last year was operating at 13.5 tera electron volts. So on a regular basis, they're producing strangelets. Now, what we are seeing since November 7th of this year is the connection or the advent of a second collider, and that's the Awake that I mentioned, the Tesla plasma wake field linear accelerator. It's only 30 meters in length, and it's been conjoined with the main ring of the LHC. And next year on May 8th, after they get done with their testing that's been going on in November and December, next year they will begin to provide pre-accelerated particles from one of the two beams of the main ring, feeding those pre-accelerated protons into this 30-meter linear accelerator, and using plasma wake fields, they will accelerate those particles 1,000-fold, and they will target what is called the north area, the center point of the main ring, with 20 peta-electron volts. We're moving from tera to quadrillion electron volts, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, it's I guess the thing that, to put this into some context for folks, as I understand it, Anthony, I get this from we both appreciate the research and the books of Joseph P. Farrell, but he actually has based some of his work on your work. And but one of the comments that he makes is that he doesn't necessarily agree with some of the areas that we're going to go into, but he agrees that there is something very strange and disturbing that is being done at CERN, and talks about the fact that you cannot create an gravity machine like or electromagnetic machine like CERN that creates 15,000 times the gravity of the Earth proportionally in this one space without having some significant impact upon the planet and even upon potentially the sun and the planets around in the solar system. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. To give some perspective, the magnets, the superconducting magnets that hold and define the pathway of the accelerated particles within the tube, within the pipe as they call it, the superconducting magnets produce magnetic lines of force that extend perpendicular or orthogonally out from the ring itself. And these reach out to the planet, but also to our magnetosphere. These magnets produce a magnetic field that is 100,000 times stronger than the magnetic field of the Earth itself. And it does change the morphology, the shape, and disrupt the integrity of our shields, of our magnetosphere and magnetopause. The result of that is allowing accelerated particles like protons and gamma rays and X-rays from the cosmos to penetrate our atmosphere and strike the Earth. This is also causing a heating of the core of the planet. But I agree with Dr. Farrell that there are dangers involved in the power levels that they're achieving. Where he differs from me is simply a matter of research. He has not gone to the depth of research into the hardcore physics as I have to really understand the mechanisms beyond just the magnets themselves. He has said that they will produce a torsion field. What he needs to add to that scenario is that previous to the creation of a torsion field will be the toroidal field. Now, a toroidal field is produced by a synchrotron accelerator with magnets in a ring, and a toroidal field is akin to the fields surrounding our planet. It's a donut-shaped field of electromagnetism. Now, from that, above that donut, if you will, are the torsion fields. Now, these are fields that are in a twisted helical pattern, and that can distort time and space and matter. The torsion fields will then produce, and this is something that Dr. Farrell does not address, but I have the physics to show this. The torsion field then produces the twisted pair Birkeland currents that are naturally occurring in the electric universe. The Birkeland currents look very much like human DNA in their twisted helical fashion, and they can extend across the cosmos for thousands of light years, and they've been photographed by Hubble telescope. The torsion field will generate this plasma conduit, the Birkeland currents, that will ultimately connect to the southern pole of Saturn. So I'll stop there.
We won't go too far into Farrell's conjectures, because he doesn't really draw conclusions as to what it means, other than the fact that he points out the comparison between creating a toroidal field or torsion physics at CERN with his area of interest, which was the Nazi bell that Kamler was involved in trying to perfect at the end of World War II, which really was a way of potentially shaping space-time and creating, in effect, a time machine. So he notices that, and he notices the canting of the rings and so forth, but he doesn't go beyond that. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, Dr. Farrell and I have had conversations in the past, many very good collaborative conversations, and he is in agreement with me in which I say his work with the Nazi bell proves to me that CERN is a further development. It is the Nazi bell on steroids, if you will. Insofar as, very quickly, I'll just give a very quick overview of the Nazi bell. It had contra-rotating fields of red mercury. This is the same thing that the synchrotron does with its contra-rotating beams of accelerated particles. So we've gone from red mercury to singular protons arranged in bunches, and in the billions and billions of bunches. So this is a further advancement of the Nazi bell, and the mechanisms are identical.
And what's really intriguing, of course, is that, as Farrell points out in his books, he talks about the ancient sciences of alchemy, and he talks about the red mercury and the connections between that and the works of the discoveries of Sir Isaac Newton and a number of the old alchemists, in the Hermetic sort of tradition. And he doesn't, again, quite go to the extent of suggesting what it is that they're trying to do, but he does point out some fascinating things that will lead us, you and me, Anthony, to some additional speculation beyond this program, which is that Germany has been one of the main contributors to the CERN project, that Germany is, in fact, it's likely that Germany has plans and designs for controlling Europe once again. And Farrell's book, The Third Way, talks about that essentially that the German plan at the end of World War II, part of the reason why the Germans gave up was not just because they were getting beaten militarily, but they were using their last year of defeat as a time frame for them to move vast riches, thousands of people, corporations, organizations out of Germany into the New World in order to be able to sustain the Nazi movement, the Third Reich to become the Fourth Reich, and so forth. And so he connects all this back to, he says CERN is in effect the new Hans Kamler lab, the Kamler's lab, if you will. So
I agree with him. I think our research is very complementary.
Yeah, and so you get into these things and you go, whoa, there's something else that's even more sinister that we haven't talked about necessarily. Maybe not more sinister, but it is sinister in its own way in terms of a fascist government.
When you speak of that, you're speaking of the worship of the black sun. Okay,
yes,
so we're right back to the swastika. We're right back to the black cube. We're right back to the black arts, which has been proven over and over that that's what the Nazis used to gain the upper hand technologically during the war. And this is all forbidden knowledge. This is knowledge that has been gained by accessing the fallen ones, the fallen angels. And this is exactly what CERN is doing to gain this technological advancement. And it is tied to what we'll talk about later, to the interdimensional communication device known as the adiabatic quantum computer from D-Wave.
Right. We'll move through several of these slides kind of quickly. Slide 15 talks about the ode to the ancient destroyer gods, Apollo, Apollyon, Abaddon, as mentioned in Revelation chapter 9. In Hebrew, the name for Apollo is Abaddon, and then Shiva. And so this is a meme or a theme of CERN that it's fascinating that the scientists continue to sort of just throw these things in our face without being willing to say that they really mean anything, and yet we know, as we'll go forward here and get more into some of the spiritual aspects of it, that there are leaders behind all of this that are up to something extremely sinister, and we're going to try to open some insight, open some doors and provide some insight to that here.
Again, as a touch point, the location of CERN was chosen because it is built upon the site of the ancient Roman temple to Apollo. This is, as you said in Revelation 9, this is the doorway to the abyss. This location was chosen specifically for that reason. They know that the power that they're generating will result in opening the doorway to the abyss.
Yeah, that's a pretty mind-blowing thought, but the fact is that they did indeed pick this location for some very specific reasons. I didn't mention the predominance of the German cult of the Brotherhood of Saturn. I will show that here in a moment, but that's another reason why the German connection to CERN is vital to understanding the program that's going on there. Right. Slide 16, Destruction First, then Rebirth. This is kind of the meaning of destruction and rebirth. This was a movie that I saw long ago. Many folks listening to the program may be too young to remember the Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, that movie, but there was a thing called the Genesis device that ultimately was what caused Spock to die and then to get reborn again. But the idea was that you could terraform a planet, but you would destroy the planet. If the planet already had life and you attempted to do the terraforming, you would destroy the life on that planet before it began to rebuild its new type of life. And this is, in effect, a pretty good picture of what we think is one of the sinister goals of CERN, is that it is a plan to eradicate something like about 8/9 of the population of the world, and it's an outrageous charge, but we think that's exactly what they're intending. Any comment, Anthony?
Yeah, the statue of Shiva at CERN is emblematic of this process because there's 3 stages involved in this symbol of Shiva, and that is, of course, destruction, and then this laying waste, this clean sheet of paper, as I call it. And this is reflected in CERN's own video they produced called Symmetry. They produced this last year. And in Symmetry, they show the 3 stages of destruction, the white playa, the desert playa, the dry lake bed that they show in the video is this sort of neutral environment. And then the rebirth of the planet, the rebirth of the new race that is spoken of so often by the occult. So Shiva is also related to Ganesh, which is another Hindu god, which relates to education and intelligence. But this goes even further. We won't go into it here tonight, but the tip of the iceberg is Shiva, and this leads to so many other deities, and the deities associated with the planets in our solar system, that it really unfolds like a flower, the spiritual aspect that drives the technology, because understand they're communicating with spirits to obtain the forbidden knowledge that then results in the hardware.
Absolutely. We'll move kind of quickly. The next slide really quotes the chapter 9 verses related to Abaddon, Apollyon. There's a picture of a strange sort of magnetic cloud that actually was formed over the top of CERN, and a little inset map that shows Genie Poulet, which was Poulet is really related to Apollo, and is part of it's a province. It's the location where the Large Hadron Collider, the 27-kilometer-mile ring, is located. The next slide shows the symmetry, a picture from the symmetry video, and it points out that we're on slide 18 now as we're talking through this, that there is a hidden agenda. The ultimate objective of CERN, it concerns spirits, not just physics, and CERN quests to birth a new race of beings, and it intends to enlist agents from the dark side to be able to accomplish that. And we see this, of course, in so many rituals, not only the rituals that are shown in this video of symmetry, but also the rituals that were seen in the opening of the Gothard Tunnel not that long ago. I believe that was last June, if I'm not mistaken, Anthony.
Right. Right.
So let's look at the next slide, slide 19, a DNA makeover of humanity. I have a picture here of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and you actually have some connection to this place and know some things about it that kind of talk about your personal story. You might talk for a couple minutes about that.
Yeah, I was born in Berkeley and grew up in Lafayette, which is right over the hill from Berkeley. My father had a medical practice in Berkeley, and many of his patients were scientists from the radiation lab. It was referred to as the rad lab on the hill, or up on the hill. And I, as a child, had a tour of the cyclotron with my father when they first began research into cancer, into oncology, using accelerated particles to treat thyroid cancers. So I had a chance to walk, the catwalks of the cyclotron when it was there. Now, today, what they have is what's called the Advanced Light Source Building, which houses a synchrotron ring-based accelerator identical to what is at CERN, however, a much smaller scale. And one of the principal things that has come out of this synchrotron at Berkeley is that they produce what are known as hard X-rays. And hard X-rays are used to infer or look at the protein folding of our DNA. Our DNA is made up of proteins, and they look at the folding or the structures, the three-dimensional structures of the proteins, and moving beyond that to the amino acids. And so what this has resulted in is using particle accelerators to look at our DNA, to digitize our DNA, to place our DNA in a binary fashion into software, such that now you can use a sequencer to reconstruct from the software pattern using the amino acids. You can reconstruct DNA anywhere you want. You can take the source DNA and in a digitized fashion transmit it through the internet or anywhere you want, transmit the signal, and using the base chemicals and a sequencer at the receiving end, create an exact matching copy, not a clone, but an exact copy of the original, because you followed the digital pattern in the software to do that. Now, you've done, Douglas, a lot of research and writing on Mars, and I've proposed the scenario that you could teleport DNA sequences to another planet, sending ahead the sequencer and the base chemicals such that you could grow your astronauts, so to speak, on another planet.
Yes, that's actually been, I don't know if it was Vintner or one of the other transhumanists that talked about this a couple of years ago in some of the research, was that the distance is not a factor. And of course, you could get, your astronaut, if you had a receiver on the other end, you could get your astronaut reconstructed, in a matter of about 15 minutes based upon the radio signal, perhaps a Birkeland current. current from Earth to Mars, and actually create that. But I think the point here is the teleportation, and teleportation. We're all familiar with it because of Star Trek. Beam me up, Scotty. By the way, Scotty actually was. This is a personal part of my story. He actually his children went to the same high school as my daughter, and he actually was one of the judges. James Doolin, I think is his name, was one of the judges in one of the events in my daughter's high school. So kind of funny. It's a small world story, but anyway, teleportation is actually something that is really close. It's not way off into 3 centuries from now. This is stuff that kind of what you're saying is pretty proximate, isn't it?
Well, it is, because you mentioned Dr. Craig Ventnor. He has the Institute for Human Longevity in La Jolla, California, and they have gone out to the desert and they have collected biological samples, and they've digitized them, sequenced them, transmitted them through the cloud to their laboratory back in La Jolla, and reconstructed the exact biological sample in the laboratory. So you're right, distance is irrelevant. All it is it requires a coherent signal so you don't lose any of that data. But as you say, at the receiving end, you have to have the sequencer and the chemicals to rebuild it. So This is not science fiction. This is information that's 5 to 6 years old now in the public domain.
It's a little bit like a 3D printer almost, except the material isn't plastic. Material is DNA, and whatever other building blocks need to be put back together again. This is a new Humpty Dumpty story, I guess.
But just to put a final thought on Berkeley. Berkeley was involved in the mapping of the human genome using their hard X-rays, and Dr. Craig Ventnor's own DNA is what was mapped. That was the Human Genome Mapping Project, and just over the hill from Berkeley, as I said, is where I grew up, is Lafayette, but next door to Lafayette is Walnut Creek, which is the Human Genome Laboratory that was built to work in conjunction with the particle accelerator at Berkeley. So I literally was dropped right into the middle of this thing.
And these things, the fact that these things are connected is vitally significant to really the thesis that we're putting forth in the book, and what we believe is really happening as it relates to Bible prophecy, the mark of the beast, the concept of the recreation of the hybrids, essentially the Nephilim in our day, that this is being done in the laboratory. And we're talking about, chimera are already being created. I mean, they're creating chimera in England and have been for years. And go ahead.
And this plays into creating the image of the beast.
Yeah, exactly. And so this stuff is pertinent to a number of the themes that those in the eschatology community, like ourselves, and to you folks that listen to programs like this, these things are really connected very, very importantly. And of course, it goes back to Genesis 1:24, that God created the creatures of the earth to reproduce after their kind, and it's not nice to fool Mother Nature, to quote that old margarine commercial from a couple of decades ago, and mixing the kinds and mixing the different creations, and creating pigs with jellyfish so they glow in the dark, and spiders. This is kind of like Spider-Man, the idea of being able to weave and spin silk that's very strong and all that. All this stuff kind of came out of these ideas of chimeras and so forth. So, we're going to run out of time, so we're going to have to do a second show to finish the rest of this. Why don't we finish up, though, with this last slide 20, and talk a little bit about D-Wave and the quantum computing, give folks a little bit of an understanding about why quantum computing is necessary, and why it also plays a part, especially, in this particle entanglement, the computing power, and why it's a key component of opening and sustaining the openings of the these dimensional portals, if you will.
Yeah, the issue here is that these quantum computers that are utilizing qubits, quantum bits, rather than transistors, is that they operate interdimensionally. If you go to my website at anthonypatch.com and you go to the Urgent Discoveries tab, you will see several quotes I have placed there from a video that's linked there from Gordy Rose in 2013, Gordy Rose being one of the co-founders of D-Wave Corporation. And I'm very quickly going to give you a couple of these quotes of his in which he was speaking to scientists and leading business people in 2013 about their Model 512 interdimensional computer. And that is that when you stand next to one of these computers, quote, it feels like an altar to an alien god, end quote. Now, another quote is that he said that when you access these parallel dimensions, that we are able to extract resources from those parallel dimensions. And he states that they are accessing with the Model 512 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions. So he's open about the fact that this is a interdimensional computer. This is not hyperbole on my part. Okay, he's talking about extracting resources. He says the shadow of these parallel worlds overlap with ours, and if we are smart enough, we can dive into them and grab their resources and pull them back into ours to make an effect in our world. In other words, using an interdimensional quantum computer to revise our reality. This machine has several model numbers, several iterations. This is working towards the key to the bottomless pit, this representing the key to the bottomless pit. And this is tied right into CERN. This machine is what will be responsible for not only opening the portal, but controlling the expansion of the portal and allowing digitized DNA and spiritual entities to come through that portal into our reality. So again, this is not conjecture. This is hard science.
Yeah, it's fascinating too, as folks looking at the slide can see the picture of the D-Wave computer, that it's a black cube, and we don't think that that's coincidental. We think that that is intentional, and it's a black cube made up of what look like other black cubes. And of course, that's just the sheathing around the computer. But nevertheless, it's a fascinating thing that they've decided to build it to look that way, and it's a little bit like the fact Steve Jobs and Wozniak, the Woz, that many people don't know this, but the Apple I, when it first came out, it was, of course, Apple has a byte taken out of it, which is reminiscent of what? Well, Adam and Eve, of course, and it's forbidden knowledge. But most people don't realize, and I've seen an ad for this, that when the Apple computer, Apple I, was first priced by Jobs and Woz, it was priced at $666.66.
Very funny guys.
Very funny guys, indeed. So this issue of the incredible power of quantum computing is an essential element. The fact that this is not just thousands, but potentially 1 million times faster than the fastest binary-based computer today. And when we come back and begin the next show, I want to drill into this issue of dimensions versus universes and talk a bit about the Mandela effect, the issue of time-space, warping time-space, and how all of this stuff kind of might play together. And then we'll bridge from that into the real spiritual aspects of this, the cult of the black cube, and what this really means in terms of Bible prophecy. potentially in really the next few months or next few years. So anyway, so Anthony, why don't we stop there in this program? We'll pick it up again. I'm not sure, it may be next week when we'll record the next program. We'll turn it back over now to Lynn. And Lynn, thank you so much for allowing us to take over your program and talk about these issues, and we'll be hopeful that we can come back and talk again about them soon, so we can get the rest of the information that folks need to have. Anthony, tell folks how they can find you on the internet, if you would.
Yeah, anthonypatch.com is my website, and Revising Reality is on sale there. Also, I have 2 novels that cover much of the areas of science that we've just touched on a little bit here, but in greater detail in a fast-paced adventure story format, which are ideal for people who have not really been exposed to science very much, and some of the areas that they've never heard about before are presented, including the portal and including the quantum computer. And it also presents something we haven't talked about tonight, but we will next week, and that is my version of the quantum computer, composed of nanodiamonds in the shape of tetrahedrons, forming a 600-cell tetrahedral sphere, which I think, definitively proven that the 600-cell tetrahedral model is the real model of our universe.
Well, that will be one tease that we'll do. Let me do another tease for the program. I'll make the statement that Stanley Kubrick's movies, in fact, he was very obsessed with the cult of the black cube. And for those of you that have seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, you know that there is a black rectangle that plays a vital part in that story. And we'll talk about those connections in the next program, as well as getting into the cult of Saturn and what that means as it relates to CERN. So, how you can find me, my website is doomsdaydoug.com, and I encourage you to buy a book from Anthony. You can get Revising Reality. I think, Anthony, you'll even share electronically copies of your other books, if I'm not mistaken. And
that's correct.
Is that correct? And then for those of you that prefer ebook formats, either Kindle or iBook, the book Revising Reality: A Biblical Look into the Cosmos is available on all of the popular iBook formats as well. So anyway, so with that,
it's doing really well on Amazon.
It's actually the number 2 eschatology book on Amazon, so it's doing extremely well. And it's also I think it's like number 7 in cosmology. So it's nice to have our book up there in the same category with Stephen Hawking and Neil deGrasse Tyson and Michio Kaku and those guys as well. So it's doing very well. So we hope that the listeners, you will take the time to get a copy. And feel free to get 2 copies and give someone a copy for Christmas too. So anyway, so Anthony, thank you so much, and Lynn, thank you so much, and we'll turn the program now back over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen, and certainly interesting information you had tonight for the listeners. And for anybody out there, if you have any questions, they gave you their websites. If you have any questions for me, you can email me at lynleahz, that's LYNLEAHZ, @gmail.com. And, be sure and check out their books and check out their information, because it's top of the line stuff. So thank you so much, you guys, and God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you. And we do hope that we can come back, and we just decided that we were rushing too much, and we need to come back and do sort of the second half of the show if we can, when it's convenient for you to have us back on.
Certainly, we'll look forward to doing that. I think that I overheard you say next week. Well, thank you so much, you guys.